Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we're reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends. Welcome to season 2.5, episode 3, where we're beginning Egeanin's point of view. I'm your co host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimarus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast, and we drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today, we are examining chapters 38 and 46 from The Shadow Rising. I'll get us started with chapter 38 entitled Hidden Faces. So it opens with Egeanin inside this posh wine shop called the Garden of Silver Breezes, one which only caters to the richest of clientele. She was meeting with a greasy scoundrel named Gelb, who had found an Adam and who was trying to locate certain women for her, uh, some escaped Suldam and Damane. She reflected on some of his recent failures and refused to give him any more money up front. She only paid for results, not for rumors. She waited a bit after dismissing Gelb, then saw two people whom she knew as she moved to leave: the large riverboat captain named Bael Doman and an inquisitor named Jacob Carradine. Egeanin was thankful she wore a mask, something that was not uncommon at all in the Garden of the Silver Breezes. She studied the city as she traveled by sedan chair. The people there were starving, wretched, and hopeless. She could not give money to any of the beggars. Even the guards carrying her chair could not keep her safe from a mob of people begging for alms. Plus, she was already spending money to fund a soup kitchen, which was seriously overstepping her bounds, acting almost as if she were one of the blood. She looked forward to the day that Tanchico fell to the Seanchan, so that there could be some order brought to this chaotic land. Now, following that, there are some other points of view, but the chapter ends again with Egeanin's point of view as she enters the house that she keeps and knew instantly that someone had been there. Someone was still there. Casually, she went to the stove, then grabbed up a small hidden crossbow and aimed it at the man who was standing casually in the corner of her room. When prompted, he provided her his credentials. He was a seeker, property of the Crystal Throne, yet with the authority to question anyone, with torture if necessary. He had Egeanin make him some tea and serve it to him, then had her jot down some maps of Tanchico and its defenses, as well as any other city or military group of which she had any knowledge. Now, all of this had already been done and sent by courier long since, so she was sensing this was some kind of test. He left, saying that he would check in on her again in a few weeks. Egeanin waited a bit after he'd left to check the padlock on the basement door. It was still thankfully locked, though that gave her a little pause, as they were supposed to be able to pick locks. So she went down and checked on the former Suldam she kept chained there, chained by an Adam. Bethaman begged to be let loose, but Egeanin went upstairs. She couldn't say why she had not returned to Bethaman as she should have, only that this secret, the secret that the Suldam could channel, would shake the Empire apart. And for some reason, Egeanin was not willing to die to keep this secret.
In this chapter, Egeanin is very much out of her element. It's especially in the beginning, not only with the feminine clothing that she doesn't seem to be used to, but she's sneaking around with all these people she finds really disgusting. She values directness and she wants an honest fight, like when she took over Beldomon's ship in the Great Hunt. But she's not going to turn away from the kind of money that she's getting by working for Suroth to find the Sul'dam, because she'll have enough money to buy a ship and an entire crew and everything else she could want. So what we know of her at this point is that she can be bought for the promise of social mobility. And I imagine that that's probably not unusual for many Seanchan, because there are such strict rules of conduct for the social classes and especially the lower ones. I think anybody would want to move up that ladder. So that's what I'm getting from Egeanin at this point. She seems ambitious. She seems to want to move up the social ladder and be able to exercise a little bit more power and some other freedoms. But she's having to put herself in very strange situations and get confused by a lot of new information in the process.
Yeah, it made me think that this was put in here, at least, Egeanin's point of view at this point, to tell us more about the Seanchan, the culture and the
Mhm,
people, because we're not really learning much about this land through her eyes, though it's told as if, she's discovering things for her people, trying to understand Tenchico, trying to understand how business is transacted here. Her disgust at the people, the poor, it's in the city. Not that there would be poor, or excuse me, not that the poor people are there and that they're begging for money, but the fact that they're not being taken care of. In Seanchan
mhm,
culture, people are put to work. If they're poor, there are soup kitchens. They will be paid. They'll be fed somehow, but they will work will be found for them. They're not just left to languish as many of these refugees are here. Now, of course, Tanchico is not always this way. We know right now it's in upheaval because of some civil strife going on. The Children of the Light, I think, are some of them behind it, Jacob Carradine especially, in trying to
mhm,
overthrow the Panarch and basically disrupt the government. As well, all this influx of refugees, many who've come from wars caused by the Children of Light, but many who've come out of lands that have been conquered previously by the Seanchan.
mhm,
Now we know they were driven
absolutely.
off at Falmouth, but that caused a lot of people just to leave and run, and so you have this huge influx of people. So she doesn't realize they're partially to blame for this. But yeah, her disgust at it is the fact that the leaders would let people just languish this way. But even though it's told as though she's looking through the point of view, learning about this land, I think the entire chapter, the entire point of view is given so we can learn more about her people, by how she views things, what her expectations are, the off-camera thoughts, if you would, of
Mhm.
comparing this to how things should be. We learn a lot more about Seanchan through her eyes.
Absolutely. In the next chapter as well, I believe the things that she assumes and is surprised by are very revealing. I think another reason this chapter exists and the reason we start getting her point of view though, I mean, she's appeared in the story before. Like I said before, she captured Bail Doman's ship in the Great Hunt, but this is her first point of view chapter a couple of books later. And so it makes you think, why now? We've had some time to maybe start learning some things about the Seanchan, but to me, it seems like we are getting set up for her character specifically to play a much bigger role in events than you might expect. She seems like she could just be a one-off character or just kind of a villain because in this chapter we also have Jacob Carradine's point of view and he doesn't last super long in the story. And
Thankfully,
we've also got Leandrin who also is taken out pretty early, not killed, but dispatched, I suppose you could say. So on a first read, it might seem like it's a villain point of view to help you learn about the Shan-Chan, but Egeanin herself goes through so many changes because of this cultural clash, and I think that's part of the reason we get her point of view because she's at this cusp where she is learning a lot of new things and trying to figure out how to assimilate, how to accommodate, or how to reject the types of things that she is learning or the types of things she used to believe. So, like at the beginning of the chapter, she seems really typical of what we might expect of a Shan-Chan person in a chaotic Westland city. That's part of how we learn that the Shan-Chan really prefer order because of her thoughts about how disgustingly disorganized the place is. And she misses civilization, as she might call it, on the other side of the ocean. But the more we get into her thoughts, the more it becomes clear to me that she's starting to get conflicted even in this first point of view chapter. She's dealing with some of the seediest parts of Tanchico that she hates, but it and she also seems like she's getting maybe a little bit corrupted by that, maybe from a Shan-Chan perspective, from dealing with these disgusting, disorganized parts of the Westlands. She's trading in information to find the Suldam on Surath's orders, as you've already mentioned. And while she's been trading in information like this, which is not something she used to do, she was a ship's captain. She was used to being very direct, right?
right?
And just has kind of a gruff bearing and military training and sensibilities. She seems like a very no nonsense kind of person. But now that she's been trading in information on this side of the ocean, she's learning the value and the power of information. And once we see her at the end of that chapter in that final vignette with the seeker, we
Right.
realize that she knows the power and value of the information she has through Bethaman. So instead of just handing over Bethaman like she should as a good Shan-Chan, she just sits on that information until she can decide what to do with it and decide how to feel about it, decide if her hunches are correct about it. And she even thinks, as you noted at the very end of the chapter, she would not cooperate with, or she is not going to cooperate with the Seekers, and she would even defy one if it meant her life, which is a very treasonous thought. So
Right.
whether she realizes it or not, I think she's starting to take advantage of some of the new freedoms that she has on this side of the ocean, and thus she's becoming less of a good, like civilized, orderly Seanchan captain who knows her place in relation to everybody else. So I just think she's set up for this rapid character change we're going to see pretty soon, and she's got the potential to also enact rapid change in her society. So you're absolutely right in that she's eyes onto the Seanchan society, because we will get to see just how much it changes over time. But
Right.
we also get to see that in her as an individual.
One of the things we see here is the difference in the way people think, and just by seeing what their expectations are.
Mhm.
It's as if the Xianchen have been isolated, across the Arith Ocean for all these years. Now, Xianchen is basically a country made up of several countries, islands and small mainlands and things all linked together politically because it's been conquered. There have been wars for, untold centuries there as different groups try to break off or set up their own power base. So they're used to that. They're used to war, but it's as if they grew up thinking about things differently, as often happens when groups are isolated for long periods of time. And they had expectations of coming across the ocean. And of course, I think they had sent spies. They had some idea of what was going on here in Randland. But by the same token, they didn't understand the people. I think they had seen themselves as being the liberators of
Mhm.
humanity, of
Mm.
bringing civilization, and everyone would be so thankful to, be delivered this civilization. They didn't stop to think that these people are used to something different. These people will resist this at every level, from the poor to the rich, that many people will resist just the thought of being ruled by the Seanchan simply because there is a difference in the way they think. And I think that's one of the things we're catching on to here, that Egeanin's change begins with just changing the way she thinks about things. Even
Mhm.
though what seemed normal to her, the suppositions she had about life and her place in life, her station, all of that is starting to be shaken and changed a little bit. And what she sees as a secret that can change all of the Seanchan society, which is true, it could, and I know we have all been in hopes that in the future it will, that it will
Mhm.
will end this idea of slavery once and for all. We still see that she understands the import of it. She understands how big it is. Yet at the same time, if she turns Bethaman over, it's certain death for her. If she
Mm.
holds on to Bethaman and keeps this secret, it's possible death for her. And
Yeah.
I believe had she not spent as much time as she had here out of her element, having to rethink who she is and kind of discover who she is when she's not a Xiantian ship's captain, that she's finding out that, I wanna live. I know she's
Mm.
been willing to give her life for the empire. That's something that's ingrained in them, how their honor system has them hold up the empire itself or the government itself as being more important than any individual. Yet, she sees that she wants to live. She wants to take that chance of keeping the secret. And I think that's because she's been given a chance to see things differently and experience things and discover or begin discovering who she is as an individual, not just who she is within Xianchan society.
Mm.
So, yeah, I like seeing that.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that struck me with this, the first part in the Garden of the Silver Breezes, you would think a Taveran was in town by just the sheer number of coincidences that are here. First of all, to, you know, be getting the information from Gelb, he leaves and she
Right.
sees Bel Domon come in and sit down, and she already knows him. So that's the first, real big coincidence there that hits her. Then the next thing that, well, I guess that actually happened first. I'm taking these out of order,
Mm.
but the other big coincidence is She was reflecting back on some things that had happened off camera, some failures of Gelb's, where he was seeking out, what he thought to be one of the escaped Suldam or Damane. Basically, he kidnapped the woman rather than bringing the information to Egeanin. He kidnapped the woman and brought the woman, and then it wound up not being who she thought it was or who he thought it was.
Mhm.
She was a minor noble person from Tanchico, and her name was Lady Lylwyn.
Mm.
And that just took the breath away from me. Just I
Yeah.
had not caught that before at any time during the reread. Nothing. That little detail had just escaped me completely, and that got me to wondering: is that just a coincidence that that's the name that Tuon picked for her? Because the Lady Lylwyn who had been, kidnapped, they had a choice to either kill her or send her by courier boat back to the Seanchan main ships, which is what they did. They
Mhm.
sent her back, and so she would be trained as a Daco Vale. So either it's just a huge grand coincidence that that's the name Tuon picked for her, or Tuon had done a little research into her underlings and found out that Egeanin had sent this woman called Lylwyn to be Daco Vale because of a mistake. And that's the reason she chose that name to kind of
Mm.
reinforce that shame that Egeanin would have at having to bear that name herself, especially since the real Lylwyn would have had that name taken away from her.
Ooh, yeah.
Um, and it just makes me wonder. I don't know if that was just extra cruelty on Tuon's part, or if that's just a huge coincidence. I don't know if there's any way to ever know.
I think there is enough information. Yeah. So I would say it might be unlikely that Tuon pulled that name out from this incident because I just don't think it's easy enough to get good information on this side of the ocean. I think so many of the networks are, disrupted. It's really the Wild West out here. And I think that we know that from how badly the Seeker gets things wrong when he approaches Egeanin here and then Bethamin later and then Farik Kareed even later. He's got everything twisted.
Ah,
But the other piece of information that I always forget or that I have forgotten a couple of times was that Egeanin chose this name for herself when they started traveling with the circus. That was her alias when she was supposed to be Matt's
oh,
lover.
oh, I had forgotten that. Oh, I had forgotten that.
And
Okay.
so the reason Tuon gave her that name, she just made that name permanent and then gave her the surname of Shipless. Now that she had fallen so far from having been one of the blood, recently raised to the blood.
Uh,
It speaks more to, I think, Egyanin's character change. That is a piece of shame she pulled from her past when she had to come up with, oh, what's a Westlander name that I could pass with? Nobody else knows. Like Matt doesn't know this. She's just wearing this name. And then Tuon, it's that much more hurtful, I guess, that Tuon gives that to her permanently and makes it stick.
oh,
But it's almost like a form of atonement, I think, that she keeps sticking with the name even after Tuon has kind of started losing her power over Egeanin, and Egeanin slash Lywin is becoming a little more liberated from the Shanchan ways of thinking.
wow, that just blows my mind. And to think that she wears that. And well, first of all, that she would be ashamed by that because many in Seanchan culture would not have.
Right.
They would have just rolled with it. No big deal. It's not me, so it doesn't matter. But so first of all, that she would have that bit of shame, and secondly, that she would use that because I had forgotten that she picked the name first
Mhm.
before Tuon gave it to her. Made it permanent to her.
Yeah. I mean, it takes
Wow.
her 6 books to get there, so she's been processing this for a while. It's not until the beginning
Yes.
of Crossroads of Twilight that she takes on this name. But, yeah, I think it speaks to just how massive these changes are within herself that she eventually comes to.
Yes. Right. Right. Well, to give up the sea entirely
Mhm.
was a huge change. She didn't want to be anything else other than the captain of a ship.
Yeah.
I mean, she preferred that over being one of the low blood. I mean, that's what she wanted to do with her life.
Mhm.
It was hereditary, and she had fought to earn her place. Because her family had been captains before her. So I do remember that much about it. But I had forgotten these little details about the name Lyle, and that just really blew me away when I saw it. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's all that I've got on this one. How about you?
I've got just a tad more. I wanna go back to that
Yes.
coincidence of bumping into Bayle Doman that you talked about,
Yes.
because, I mean, it's a coincidence in multiple ways because she knows him previously, but so does Gelb. I mean, that's where we first met Flora and Gelb was on the spray in the Eye of the World. It's just interesting, like, I wonder if Gelb slips out before Doman sees him because I feel like Doman would might have started some kind of trouble or at least had some words for him if he'd
Right.
caught him on the way out.
Right. See, I the name Gelb seemed familiar, but I didn't recall, but you're right, he's the one that was causing trouble. Bail Doman kept threatening to throw him overboard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He's the one who, Rand stepped on when he jumped onto the ship when they were fleeing Shadow
Yes.
Logoth 'cause Gelb was sleeping, and he just
Yes, yes.
he wouldn't admit that he was sleeping on the job.
He was attacked by Trollocs
Yep,
personally.
yep. He's been kinda just rubbing his hands looking for some way to get back, at the world basically ever since they dumped him in Whitebridge. So here he is, get trying to get that revenge and having this greed, really. You got the coincidence of all 3 of them bumping into each other, you know,
Right.
Bail Doman would know Egeanin from her taking over the ship, and if she spoke enough, he would probably recognize her voice too. I don't imagine that's something you would forget because he heard her voice before he even saw her face because she had the weird helmet
Yes,
on,
that's right.
and he was surprised that, she was a woman. I remember that from when she captured his ship. Yeah, it's absolutely, like you're saying, Tavir and, like, coincidences that they're all bumping into each other, and I also find it kind of funny how casually Egeanin thinks that she might need to dispose of him when she bumps into him, and then she's like, "Oh, yeah, he wouldn't recognize me,
Right.
but I may have to do something about it if he becomes a problem," and she thinks it again in the next chapter.
Yeah.
But weirdly, she doesn't think that about grubby little Gelb, really. She's never like, "Oh, I might have to, like, throw Gelb's body in a ditch and go find another guy to give me information." So it's just weird that she thinks Gelb might be able to or that she doesn't recognize the power that Gelb might have to hurt her and her, ambitions and what she's trying to do, but she, is worried about Bail Doman. Maybe
Right.
it's just that Doman might say, "Hey, she was at Falma," when people don't remember she was there. Like, I'm not exactly sure what all she thinks Doman could do, or if he's just gonna blow her cover with here in Tanchico and be like, "Look, everybody, it's a Seanchan."
Yeah. That was my thoughts is, yeah, she didn't want her cover blown.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But she's been
Yeah.
there enough, she's politically astute enough, she recognized Jacob Carradine, and I don't really know
Yeah.
why, but, other than the fact that, he's a political figure and she's there on a spy mission, an espionage mission. Just one of those things I noted that she knew who he was, but obviously he would not have known her,
Yeah.
but she steered clear of him either way.
Yeah, I that must be some information she has gotten from her informants, like, maybe Gelb's not the only one either, but, surely she paid people to tell her, like, "Hey, I'm not from around here, can you point out all the important people to
Right,
me?" You know, or something a little more subtle than that, but
right,
that's what
right.
I imagine she must have done. It's funny that you bring up Jake Carradine, though, because I noticed this funny parallel, this like ironic parallel of how she thinks about the Children of the Light when she sees Jacob Carradine and how she thinks about the Seekers later when that one is in her house. She's got just this rage at the concept of the Children of the Light, that there's this independent military force that doesn't answer to anybody else politically. When we get to the seeker part of the chapter, and she, in her thoughts, is teaching us about the concept of seekers, and they sound very parallel to the children's questioners to me, of which Jacob Carradine is he's a questioner, obviously. There's a key difference between them in that I guess the seekers supposedly are answerable to the crystal throne, but they have so much leeway to do pretty much anything they want with anybody of any social class, and it's not like they're receiving direct orders from the empress about every single person they target and what to do with them. So they have quite a lot of independence. It sounds like they can kind of investigate and torture largely on their own terms, and they could do this of people in the blood too. So it's just funny to me that Egeanin in this chapter, she's got all this disdain for how uncivilized the Westlands are. And one of her examples, it just seems like such a mirror to this other piece of Shanchan society. And it's all the more ironic because the Seekers are thought of as a piece of Shanchan society that supposedly keeps the society so organized and
Right, right.
civilized.
So, both of them can do horrible things and pretty much have a license to kill.
Yeah.
One is, supposedly answers to the crystal throne, and the other supposedly answers to the light. But, but
Right.
they can use that license to do pretty much whatever they want. I guess the only
Mhm.
exception to that is the the children of the light have to answer to no one outside of their own organization. And
Yeah.
yeah, the Seekers do have to enter the Crystal Throne and make it sound like their position is as precarious as that of anyone of the Blood or anyone else, just because they, on a whim, or if they do the wrong thing, they can be put to death very quickly. Yeah, no due process, no trial really, but they could just be put to death because they made a mistake or they tortured the wrong person to get the information only to find out they didn't, they weren't really plotting against the throne. So,
Mhm.
yeah, they do have to answer to another governmental body, whereas the
Yeah.
Inquisitors, they have to answer to the Lord Captain Commander, but even so, we say they do that pretty loosely, and they're
Mhm. Yeah.
considered about as autonomous as you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Seekers, though, even though, like you said, they hold a pretty precarious position themselves because they are property of the Crystal Throne, supposedly. I think that we have the idea from some other chapters, I can't remember where, that they could just as easily question a royal family member or something.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
that's
they
right.
do have so much authority that they're not just having to ask the empress, like, "Hey, I have some compromising information about one of your kids. Can we have a trial about it?" um,
Right.
so I think there are some differences here between them for sure. I think a lot of
Oh,
them are
yeah.
a lot more superficial than somebody like Egeanin would notice, and I think that's the fact that she doesn't notice this irony in the way that this is kind of bookended in the chapter. These very parallel
Right,
thoughts about these
right.
organizations. I think that is just another illustration of how much at a crossroads she is, because she still is very much within a Seanchan way of thinking with some aspects and doesn't notice the contradictions, and then at other times, she's questioning what she knows about Seanchan.
Ah,
She's very
yes.
poised to make a lot of change here, but she's still kinda got a foot in both worlds.
Yeah, it's just odd, again, this Xianqian presupposition on the way people think that she didn't see the difference in her attitudes, against one as against the other.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it's a
But yeah,
fun
I think
chapter.
yeah, I think those are about all my notes for this chapter, so I'm gonna move on to my summary of chapter 46 called Veils, in which we find Egeanin alone, well dressed, but carrying a big stick through the streets of Tanchico. She could not afford the usual armed escort that would tip off Flor and Gelb to her following him. She almost lost him for good when the crowd opened up around a man with a broken arm. He had been punished harshly for begging, presumably by a fleeing veiled figure. After the distraction, Egeanin climbs up on a fountain to look over the crowd and spots Gelb with his rough associates. She's convinced they're going to kidnap again. He and his goons appear to be targeting a pair of women in silks who stick out for walking rather than using a sedan and who carried staves like Egeanin's own. One roughly matched the description of one of the Suldam Egeanin sought, but was not her. Then the perspective switches to Elaine's. She and Nynaeve get attacked by Gelb's men, and Egeanin comes to their aid, helping them dispatch the goons. Gelb himself almost stabs Egeanin in the back before Elaine uses Sidar to fling him into a backflip. They thank Egeanin for her help and assure her that despite what she saw, she has nothing to fear from them. They head back to their inn to talk, where they find Julian claiming he's found the Black Aja hideout, now abandoned. When they go to a private chamber to eat and talk, Egeanin is baffled by the strange relationships these Aes Sedai have with those around them. Nynaeve and Elaine give her conflicting answers about whether Julian is their servant. The innkeeper chats so familiarly with them. A serving boy clearly lusts after Elaine, and Elaine herself is a noble, but also Aes Sedai somehow. She can't quite figure out where everyone fits, but she recognizes from Julian's report that the Aes Sedai are looking for someone. She offers to trade that information for knowledge of Aes Sedai. The girls seem to think that she herself wants to go to the White Tower for training, and they encourage her. Although she doesn't have the spark, perhaps she could learn. It could be learned? This was certainly news to Egeanin. Then Tom bursts in to explain the political chaos. A panarch that no one voted for has been instated, and there are likely to be riots. So they can't go outside without guards anymore. He's arranged for Bail Doman's men and a carriage to cart them about the city now. In fact, they're outside waiting right this minute. The mention of Doman reminds Egeanin that she has urgent business anywhere else at the moment, and she agrees to come back and ask her questions later. Then the innkeeper lets Elaine and Nynaeve know that someone is looking for them, so they allow her to send in a woman who, unbeknownst to them, is Mogideon. The spider puts them under compulsion and draws from them information about their Black Aja hunt, but they are able to hold back some information due to narrow literal interpretations of her questions. Then the chapter switches back to Egeanin's perspective. The Seanchan woman is leaving the inn, eyeing the men in the courtyard. None of them appear familiar to her. As far as she could tell, none had been on Bail Doman's vessel when she captured it, and so she hoped none would recognize her. Her palms were sweaty, and she reflected on the startling information she had learned from this brief encounter. The Aes Sedai were not at all what she had expected, and the fact that channeling could be learned was astonishing. She could stay safe as long as she kept out of Doman's sight. But in the final paragraph, the point of view switches to the Seeker, who watched her as she left. He slipped into the inn, hoping that his gold would get him answers about what she had been doing there. And thus ends chapter 46, Veils.
There are a couple of things in here that I had forgotten were squeezed into the same chapter,
Mhm.
um, because it seems like these earlier books in the series before we hit the slog, that so many things happen. It's a very action-packed chapter, but I had forgotten that the attack in the marketplace happened at the basically in the same setting or the same chapter as Mogadine coming in and putting them under compulsion.
Yeah.
These things are happening fast and furious here. Things are really rolling in quickly. One of the things that I found striking here is in Egeanin's head, in her thoughts, as she's listening to the girls, watching them, trying to figure out the dynamics between them and the people around them. Because in
Mm.
Seanchan culture, their culture is very stratified, and you respond one way to people who are in your social level, and you react to respond differently to people in a different social caste or social level. But here we see the Aes Sedai, whom she incorrectly believes these girls to be,
Mhm.
that they, they're, to begin with, they're not raving monsters, because you remember from the the Seanchan point of view, the reason women who can channel need to be collared, and the reason men who can channel need to be put to death is these are the people who broke the world. I
Yeah.
think that was one of the thoughts that Egeanin had earlier about
Mhm.
these. That as literally the way they're told about this is these are the people who broke the world. So that's why they need to be controlled, ostensibly in their minds. So the fact that these women who can channel are not raving monsters, they don't go around hurting people on a whim, they're not abusing their powers, at least right now, where she can see. They may have bent that rule a little bit over the course of the story, but the fact they're not doing that is strange to her because that's what she had expected. The dynamics between they, Tom and Julian, and even the innkeeper who comes in to serve them, there's this familiarity, there's this friendship, there's camaraderie, and she just doesn't know how to fit that into any kind of social strata, and
Yeah.
so it's all confusing to her. And one would suspect that if a Seanchan person were to walk into a room filled with people they didn't know, one of the first things they would do is watch everyone's reactions and what they do, watch their movements, pick up on body language to be able to fit in,
Mhm.
to know where you fit in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
And it's probably just second nature to them now. They don't think about it. So she's in this situation, and yet everything is conflicting to her. She doesn't have any idea of how they fit in, which brought me to another thought here. Where do Nynaeve and Elaine fit in? Because you're presenting themselves as Aes Sedai. They're more powerful than most any Aes Sedai out there, but they're very untrained, very, not as skilled and as refined as an Aes Sedai. They've not gone through all the training and the trials. Yet we see that by the end of the story, all the training and the trials and other things of the White Tower have basically locked the White Tower into stasis.
Mhm.
Women are no longer thinking of new unique ways to use the power. They do what they've been trained to do. So, there's not a lot of innovation with the power. There's not a lot of really other uses for it other than those things they've been shown. So they don't really fit in with the Aes Sedai. They're more powerful, yet they're untrained, yet they're willing to step out and try things that no one else would try. They're willing to do things and discover things that nobody else was willing to do and discover. So And of course, we know our characters are a little overpowered as well,
Mhm.
and have this plot armor around them. Nothing bad can happen to them. But at the same time, we see they don't fit in with the Aes Sedai. They don't fit in with the other people in Tanchico. They really don't fit in anywhere. And in a way, that's one of their strengths, I think. But I mean, part of the story is the characters struggling to fit in and find their place and make their mark. Yet we see that Egeanin hit on something here. They don't really fit in anywhere. They don't fit in back home. Even Elaine, when she becomes Queen of Andor, she doesn't rule like you'd expect a queen to rule. She does things differently. She does things her own way. She goes out into the last battle and participates in it, putting her babies at risk, putting the kingdom at risk because she doesn't fit into the mold where anyone expects her to. Nynaeve never does. So it's one of those things that Egeanin hit on something that most people don't see about these girls is they refuse to just fit in, and instead they really come out big and make their mark in the world.
Yeah, there's something to be said for Egeanin's ignorance of the culture helping her to see clearly in some way, right? Like she's able in this scene, the fact that she notices that they don't fit in. I mean, not just like with the silks carrying the barrel staves, walking around with no guards. Like that one's a little more obvious for maybe any Tenchican, right? But
Yes,
but the stuff you were referring to with what are their relationships to everybody else in this room in the restaurant, that or in the inn, that's what Egeanin is struggling with. But you're right that she sees pretty clearly that they do stand out, whereas maybe other people in that restaurant might ask fewer questions because they're used to chaos right now, and they're used to a lot of foreigners, and they're used to people who maybe don't quite make sense according to the social categories that they grew up with.
right.
So, yeah, there's something like penetrating about Egyanin's gaze on them here because she isn't distracted by some of the cultural stuff that she doesn't understand in the first place. So, yeah, I think she notices their kind of like youth and naivete because if they were full Aes Sedai, they probably wouldn't the innkeeper wouldn't be talking to them like that. They wouldn't tolerate that. The boy wouldn't be looking at Elaine like that. She would have this Aes Sedai bearing about her that would shut him up. I mean, you know what it's like when Nynaeve scowls at somebody, for example, or when an
Right.
Aes Sedai looks at any man, and they just kind of cower.
Yeah.
So Egeon is really onto something there.
Right.
And I also think it says plenty about herself, obviously. Like she we get to see what she doesn't know about the Westlands, and thus that tells us just how much structure and predictability the Seanchan have about exactly people's places to each other. Like you said, they could kind of size up everybody in the room and figure out where they fit. And part of the challenge here is I think the Seanchan coming over once they see that the uniforms aren't the same as theirs. They probably assume that they could still read the body language and the positions in the same way if they look deeper than the confusing uniforms. And then they find that that doesn't even help them. I think that's what Egeanin is trying to do here, trying to use her own kind of scripts and dialects of body language to read what everybody here is doing, and it's not adding up. And I think that just speaks to, the fact that she's not very acculturated to the Westlands yet. She is still very much Seanchan in her identity, although she has a decent cover that's good enough for these really naive girls right now anyway, because she's smart enough to ask whether Julian was a servant, whereas that's not a concept that
Right.
Seanchan really understands. So I think they kind of just categorize what people in the Westlands would call servant as maybe like into Sojin or Dako Vale. So I think she's assuming in her own language, she would probably call Julian some kind of Sojin, maybe, is kind of how it looks to her.
Mhm. Right.
And if she had been a little, fresher in her stay in the Westlands, I think that's probably what she would have asked. Is this man your Sojin? So
Right.
she at least knew better what kind of language to use, but she still makes some slip ups even with her language that should be kind of rookie mistakes. She almost says, "Are you of the blood?" when she was referring to Elaine's nobility and then asking Nynaeve, "Are you of the blood also?" She goes, Are you a noble too?" And so
Ah,
the
yes.
fact that she asks certain types of questions, she has these slip ups. It's another thing for me showing it at what a transition period she's in, she still has very much a foot within Seanchan culture, but she's starting to step outside of that, but not enough in a way that's, like, convincing that she's no longer Seanchan.
Yeah, but just I love seeing through her eyes. It At this point in the story, we're still regarding the Seanchan as quote unquote the bad guys,
Mhm.
and she helps unfold some dimensions to them that we don't see prior to this. That they're not just you can't be thought of as good guys or bad guys. They're just people of a very different culture, very different background. Yes, they are coming in as conquerors, and yes, they do have some barbaric practices that they consider to be civilized. Yet, at the end of the day, they're just people. They're humans, and you begin to see this. You begin to see dimensions to them and to their culture through Egeanin's eyes. So I like that. But when we talked about the social stratification and how they they have to kind of gauge where they fit into that, it kind of hit me that it's sad at this point they would have known better how to respond to one of the Forsaken than they would an Aes Sedai or the
Yeah.
girls here or most other people, most any ruler or anyone in power. They would struggle trying to understand how those people are in power. The Forsaken just, they pretty much come in, and of course, they use compulsion or use force or whatever else, but you instantly know where you are with them.
Mhm.
In this, society, in a more free society, there's a lot more equality among people, among the sexes, among between royalty and non-royalty. That yeah, it is confusing. There's a lot of social context there that she really struggles with. But so that kind of bothers me. That it's sad that she would instantly assess where she was with one of the Forsaken because of their attitude, because of the way they
Mhm.
treat people. Yet she's not just quote unquote one of the bad guys. She's just a person and trying to figure her way into being a spy when she was never trained to be a spy.
Yeah. Yeah, she just has some of this stuff fall into her lap really because because Elaine and Nynaeve are so naive in the stuff they
Right.
let slip.
Yes.
It's interesting to me that, in thinking about what Egeanin was expecting from Aes Sedai and thinking about, how monstrous she expected them to be and stuff, I think it's especially telling for Egeanin's imminent character change, and I guess her change that's in progress right now, where she's got all this cognitive conflict, I guess. It seems like when she meets them, it shakes up her idea of Aes Sedai altogether, which is not necessarily something you would predict from somebody who has very strong stereotypes about an outgroup, a group that they don't belong to in some way. So typically, people, if they meet members of an outgroup and then they like them, they think of those people as exceptions. Oh, they're one of the good ones, if they have negative stereotypes about that group. And so Egeanin doesn't immediately try and categorize them in that way, from what I can tell. She's not like, oh, these are unusual Aes Sedai. She starts to be confused about what are Aes Sedai even? What is this Marath Damane concept? Because it doesn't look like what I thought it would. And I think the reason that happens for her is because she's already primed to learn that some of the things she used to know are not necessarily true on this side of the ocean, and maybe not true at all. So if she had not already had this experience with Bethamin being collared, I think she easily could have written off these girls as Marath Damane. But she doesn't think of them that way. She keeps thinking of them as Aes Sedai, even in her mind. And so I think that just goes to show that she is ready for change because other Shan-Chen who didn't have the same information that might make them question their worldviews could have come upon these girls and tried to act as spies and came out of it with a totally different set of conclusions.
The fact that she could put that little tidbit together of the way that using the power can sometimes be learned by certain people, where most Xianchen would have just ignored that because they can be very good about ignoring things they don't want, like many of the
Yeah.
characters in the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would have been a meaningless bit of information to most Xianchen. But since she had a former Suldam collared in her basement, that little tidbit, that clicked in place in her mind. So yeah, again, one of those places where she was perfectly suited for that little tidbit of information at that time. And again, she's one of the first Seanchan to really see the implications of what this can do to the Empire and how it can change them. And it took a
Yeah.
long time for Tuon to get there. But I think she finally had started to understand it, and then understand that she could essentially be Mareth Damane, which it's just world shattering
Yeah.
to her point of view. And I don't know what kind of mental gymnastics she went through, but Egeanin went through a few here. But you can see that's one of the little seeds that were planted to help push her toward changing, toward being a different person later in the series.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's just the big theme that I keep pulling out about her is just how ready she is for change and why she is such a cool perspective to have on the Seanchan because we're getting
Right.
them immersed from within the culture right now with her unquestioned assumptions in the beginning, and then we get her thoughts
Yeah.
that are more critical of the Empire later. So
Right.
she gives us a double dose of
Yeah.
that, and that's what I
Right.
really like about her character.
Yeah. And sometimes help us understand a little more about our other characters just by comparison, and,
Yeah,
being able
true.
to contrast those things. So, yeah, I like it. I hope all of our listeners will join us for our next interlude episode, number 4, where we begin reading Egeanin's point of view in the prologue to A Memory of Light, as well as covering a quick synopsis of her story throughout the rest of the books.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane, LajaradaYne. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen to us. You can contact us by emailing at lajaradane@gmail.com or on Twitter at mind_wheel. And to support the show and get access to some perks like show notes and Discord access, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheel of mind.